They drove past me. My father was behind the wheel. My mother in the passenger seat. Both of them looking right at me through that car window. I was 12 years old, standing alone in the middle of Union Station, Chicago, the biggest, loudest, most terrifying place I had ever been in my life. I had $9 in my pocket. No phone. No address written down. And no idea how the trains worked. My mother rolled down her window. She leaned out just far enough for me to hear her over the traffic. She said, "I bet $50 you can't even find your way home." Then she laughed. My father lifted one hand off the wheel, a stupid little thumbs up, like he was congratulating himself on a great joke. And then the car disappeared into traffic. I stood there frozen on the sidewalk outside that station, watching the gap where their car had been, unable to process what had just happened. They hadn't gotten confused. They hadn't made a wrong turn. They had planned this. My fear was not a side effect of what they were doing. It was the entire point. My name is Sophia Bennett. I'm 32 years old. I'm a graphic designer in Denver, Colorado. I have a husband named Alex, a rescue dog named Max, and a life so steady and quiet that most mornings I wake up and genuinely cannot believe it belongs to me. But this morning was not one of those mornings. This morning, I woke up to 29 missed calls from an Illinois number. I stood in my kitchen staring at that screen for so long that my coffee went cold in my hand. Because before I listened to a single voicemail, before I pressed play on a single message, I already knew. Some memories don't fade. They wait. They sit in the dark corners of your life, perfectly still, perfectly patient, until one ordinary morning they reach up and drag you all the way back. And for me, all it took was a number on a screen. Suddenly I was 12 years old again. Standing alone in a train station, watching the only people who were supposed to protect me turn my terror into a 20-minute game. But here's what they never bet on. I did find my way home. Just not back to theirs. Let me tell you about growing up in Willow Creek, Illinois. From the outside, we looked like every other middle-class family you've ever driven past on a Sunday afternoon. My father grilled in the backyard on weekends. My mother waved at neighbors over the fence. They owned a small chain of home goods stores, the kind that sold kitchen mixers and discount coffee makers and every random household item people forgot they needed until they walked past a bright display. Respectable. Solid. A family other people pointed to when they wanted to talk about hard work and good values. But inside that house, love was always tied to performance. And my mother had a favorite word. Lessons. If I cried, I was too sensitive. If I asked for help, I was helpless. If I forgot something, I needed to learn responsibility. She could turn any normal childhood mistake into a reason to humiliate me. And my father always backed her up with a grin, like cruelty was a team sport they both enjoyed playing. I was 8 years old the first time I really understood what I was dealing with. My old sneakers were falling apart at the toes. I asked for a new pair at the mall. Simple. Ordinary. The kind of thing kids ask for all the time. My mother told me I was acting spoiled. She marched me to a bench near the food court and said if I wanted to live in the real world, I could start right now. Then they left. I sat at that bench for 3 hours. I still remember the smell of cinnamon and butter from the pretzel stand. I remember trying not to cry because every time I cried, it seemed to entertain them. When they finally came back, my father laughed and asked my mother if she owed him $20. He bet I'd still be sitting in the same spot. She did owe him $20. They laughed about that the whole drive home. I was 8. It kept escalating. That's the thing about cruelty wrapped in parenting language. It doesn't stay the same size. It grows, because it needs to, because the person inflicting it needs higher and higher stakes to feel the same satisfaction. When I was 10, I cried after a football game because a group of boys had mocked me in the parking lot. Instead of comforting me, my parents drove to the far side of the stadium lot, told me to get out, and left me there after sunset. Because tears made people weak. And weakness attracted worse treatment. I sat on a concrete curb with my arms wrapped around my knees, watching trucks pull out one by one, until they came back nearly an hour later with fast food for themselves. No apology. No hug. My father thought it was hilarious that I hadn't tried to hitch a ride home. He said he'd bet I would. See the pattern? Everything became a test. Everything became a joke at my expense. Everything became a way for them to prove that the world was hard, as if a child needed her own parents to harden it further. The strangest part was they never thought of themselves as cruel. They talked about character. About grit. About preparing me for reality. They used big, clean words to make ugly things sound noble. But independence was not what they were building in me. Fear was. Hypervigilance was. Silence was. I learned to study their moods before I spoke. I learned how to disappear inside my own house. I learned that if I stayed quiet enough, useful enough, invisible enough, maybe I could move through a day without being chosen. The only place I ever felt like I existed outside their rules was on paper. I drew constantly. On receipts, on the margins of homework, on cheap sketch pads I bought with babysitting money. Bedrooms with locked doors. Train windows full of light. Women standing on mountaintops with no one behind them. At 12, I couldn't explain any of that to you. But I know now I was trying to draw my way out of my own life. What finally pushed everything over the edge was something so small most parents wouldn't remember it a week later. I got a B+ in art class. Not math. Not science. Art. The one subject that made me feel like I existed. I was proud of it until I walked through the front door and saw my mother holding the report card like it was evidence of a crime. She asked how a girl who spent so much time drawing could still manage to disappoint her in the one class she supposedly cared about. My father said maybe I was getting lazy. My mother said maybe I'd started thinking effort was enough. That night I heard them in the kitchen, their voices low and amused in that specific way that always made my stomach tighten. My mother said I needed a lesson I'd never forget. My father said he'd bet money on that. The next morning they were cheerful. Suspiciously, terrifyingly cheerful. My mother made pancakes. My father asked if I wanted orange juice. They said we were taking a day trip to Chicago. Just the three of us. I should have known better. The whole drive from Willow Creek to the city felt wrong. My father kept the radio loud. My mother kept turning from the passenger seat to ask me questions with that amused edge in her voice. Did I think I was smart? Did I think smart girls were ready for the real world? Did I think life would care if I was scared? Every answer I gave made them smile at each other. By the time Chicago's skyline appeared on the horizon, I had that feeling in my body, the one that said something bad was coming and I would not be allowed to prepare for it. We parked near Union Station around noon. I had never seen anything that big or that crowded in my life. The station felt like an entire city compressed under one roof. People with rolling suitcases moved in every direction. Businessmen, families, tourists, college kids, all of them moving like they belonged there. I stayed close to my parents because I didn't know where else to stand. Inside the main hall, my mother pointed to a huge pillar near the entrance and told me to wait there while they moved the car and grabbed lunch. 15 minutes, she said. Maybe 20. I asked if I could come with them. My father laughed so loudly that people turned to look. My mother leaned close and told me not to embarrass her in public. So I stood by that pillar and watched them walk away. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Then 45. I kept telling myself the parking was bad. The food line was long. They'd gotten turned around. An hour in, my chest started to hurt. An hour and a half in, I could feel panic rising so fast it made my hands shake. $9 in my pocket. No phone. No address. No idea how trains worked. I started walking a few feet from the pillar, then rushing back, terrified of doing the wrong thing, still following rules set by the people who had abandoned me. That right there, that's one of the cruelest parts of what they'd done over the years. They had trained me not to trust anyone, then left me in a place where trust was the only thing that could save me quickly. And then I saw the car. Through the front windows. Moving slowly past the street outside. I saw it glide by and my whole body flooded with relief so strong I almost laughed out loud. I ran toward the glass, waving both arms. They were looking right at me. My father was driving. My mother was in the passenger seat. Both of them looking directly at me. My father smiled first. Not the relieved smile of someone who found a lost child. The smile of someone watching a punchline land exactly the way he'd hoped. And then my mother rolled down her window, leaned out, and through the noise of Chicago traffic, she yelled, clear as anything. I bet $50 you can't even find your way home. My father did the thumbs up. And the car moved on. I ran back inside because I didn't know what else to do. I wandered from one end of the station to the other, crying, stopping, wiping my face every few minutes because I was still embarrassed to be seen upset. My parents had trained that into me too. I tried to think of someone I could call. There was no one. I tried to picture the route home. It might as well have been another country. I sat on bench after bench. Stood up. Walked in circles. At some point I stopped expecting them to come back. At some point, the waiting ended and the abandonment began. That difference may sound small. When you're 12 years old, it feels like falling through ice. The woman who finally noticed me was a station employee named Maria. She was in her 50s. Tired eyes. The kind of calm voice that makes you want to tell the truth even when you're scared. She'd apparently seen me pass the same row of seats multiple times. She stopped me near a hallway and asked if I was lost. I lied immediately. I said I was waiting for my parents. She asked how long I'd been waiting. I said I didn't know. She asked if I'd eaten. That was the question that broke me. I started crying so hard I could barely breathe. All the shame I'd been swallowing since noon came apart in one ugly rush. I told her they'd left me. I told her they'd driven past the station and laughed. I told her my mother had bet money on whether I could find my way home. Maria didn't flinch. She didn't tell me to calm down. She crouched so her face was level with mine and said very clearly, "You are safe right now. And I am going to help you." Security came. Transit police came. An officer took my statement while another checked the station cameras. They confirmed I'd been there for hours. They confirmed a car matching my description had slowed near the curb. That mattered later. When they finally reached my parents by phone, I could only hear half the conversation. But I will never forget the officer's face going from professional calm to open disbelief in about 10 seconds. He went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "No, ma'am. Leaving a 12-year-old in a major transit station is not a lesson in independence. It is child abandonment." My whole body went cold. Not because those words sounded too harsh. Because they fit perfectly. By early evening, I was sitting in a small interview room with a social worker while a report was being filed. My parents were refusing to come back to Chicago. Still insisting this had been a parenting decision. The social worker explained I couldn't simply go home, even if they changed their minds. There would be an emergency placement while family court reviewed the case. She believed me. More than that, the look on her face said she believed I had not been safe long before that day. The foster family they placed me with that night was named Bennett. Mark was a photographer with ink stains on his fingers. Laura was a preschool teacher who smelled faintly like lotion and classroom paper. Their house was warm and lived in. A lamp on in the entryway. Family photos on the wall. A dog bed in the corner. Laura asked if I wanted spaghetti or soup. Mark asked if I preferred the hall light on or off when I went to sleep. Nobody yelled when I said I didn't know. Nobody laughed when I cried at the dinner table after taking 2 bites and realizing I was too exhausted to pretend I was okay. That first night in their guest room, I barely slept. Every car door made me flinch. Every creak in the hallway made me sit up. But one thought kept circling, over and over and over. A stranger at a train station had shown me more kindness in 5 minutes than my own mother had shown me in years. And once you see that other people are capable of protecting you, it becomes impossible to keep calling cruelty normal. In court, my parents showed up with a lawyer and the same attitude they'd always had at home. Calm. Offended. Slightly amused that anyone was taking this so seriously. My mother wore a navy blazer and pearl earrings, as if looking respectable would erase what she'd done. They didn't deny leaving me at Union Station. That was the most unbelievable part. They admitted it. They just insisted it had been controlled. Educational. Necessary. My mother said they were trying to build resilience. My father said children in this country had gotten too soft. I sat across from them and realized something that changed me almost as much as the train station itself. They were never going to become the kind of people who understood what they'd done. If they'd been capable of that honesty, they would have turned the car around before they ever hit the freeway. The court-appointed therapist's report described a pattern of emotional abuse, humiliation, neglect, and escalating endangerment. Those words weren't mine. But hearing them spoken out loud felt like oxygen entering a locked room. For years I'd believed my childhood was somehow my fault, because that was easier than accepting the people in charge of me were choosing harm deliberately. The report made it plain. This had not been a misunderstanding. This had not been strict parenting. This was abuse dressed up in middle-class language. When the judge asked if I wanted to return home while the court monitored the family, I said no. So fast the word shocked even me. My mother stared like I'd slapped her. My father muttered something under his breath about ingratitude. The judge didn't flinch. The court offered my parents a path forward. Commit to a 2-year reunification program. Parenting classes. Family therapy. Supervised visits. Regular reviews. A long process. But a fair one. They hated every part of it. They hated being evaluated. They hated the oversight. They hated that teachers, therapists, and court officers now had access to the private face of the family they'd spent years polishing for everyone else. My father complained more about the damage to the store's reputation than he did about losing custody of his daughter. My mother kept saying the state had no right to tell her how to raise her own child. And then, in the most important moment of the entire case, they were given a simple choice: commit to the program, or voluntarily surrender their parental rights. They chose surrender. Just like that. My chest didn't break in the courtroom the way you might expect. It went strangely still. I had spent my whole life trying to be good enough to keep them from turning on me. And in the end, they gave me up rather than admit they were wrong. They didn't lose me because the system took me. They handed me over to protect their pride. The Bennetts became my parents. Not all at once. Not dramatically. The way real things grow, slowly, without announcement. Mark started setting aside art books and photography magazines because he'd noticed how much I drew. Laura knocked before entering my room, which sounds like such a tiny thing until you grow up somewhere privacy doesn't exist. They learned which foods made me anxious because of old punishments tied to dinner. They stopped asking me to make eye contact when I was upset. They didn't demand love, gratitude, or instant trust. They just stayed. Steadiness feels almost supernatural to a child who has never had it. When the adoption was finalized, I was asked if I wanted to change my name. I didn't hesitate. Jennifer Caldwell belonged to a girl who had stood in a station with $9 in her pocket and no idea if she would be alive or dead to her own family by the end of the day. Sophia Bennett belonged to someone else entirely. Someone with a room of her own, a desk full of drawing supplies, and a family that didn't laugh when she was afraid. The night after the adoption was official, Laura put fresh sheets on my bed like she always did on Sundays. Mark left a new sketchbook on my desk. Nobody made a speech. Nobody told me how lucky I should feel. They just acted like I had been theirs all along. That quiet certainty healed more in me than any dramatic moment ever could. Healing didn't happen all at once. People love stories where one act of rescue fixes everything. Where the damaged child instantly blossoms the moment she lands in a better home. My life wasn't like that. For years, my body still reacted to kindness like it might be a trap. If Laura said she'd be back in 15 minutes, I had to fight the urge to stare out the window until her car returned. If Mark was late picking me up because of traffic, I could feel panic building so fast my hands went numb. I hated waiting in public places. I hated being told to stay put. I hated the phrase "I'll be right back." Therapy helped. But it was slow work. The kind that forces you to say ugly truths out loud until your nervous system slowly starts to believe what your mind wants it to know. I learned the words trauma and hypervigilance and emotional abuse. I learned that being hurt over and over doesn't make you stronger in the way cruel people claim. It makes you brilliant at survival and terrible at rest. Through all of it, the Bennetts never rushed me. Art became more than escape, it became structure, language, proof that I could make something beautiful without anyone's permission. I poured myself into it through high school, then into every portfolio review and late-night studio session after I got into the Art Institute of Chicago. Moving back toward the city that had once terrified me wasn't symbolic at first. It was practical. The school was right. But somewhere during those years, I realized I was taking something back. The same city where I had been abandoned became the place where I built myself. After graduation, I moved to Denver. Took a job at a branding firm. Went to therapy. Learned how to exist around people who didn't require me to shrink. Eventually, I opened my own studio. Built a reputation for clean visual storytelling, helping people say clearly who they were and what they stood for. Sometimes the irony of that was almost funny. My entire career grew from the fact that I had spent childhood trapped inside somebody else's lies. I met Alex at a housewarming party through a mutual friend. Patient in a way that didn't feel performative. Very hard to rattle. On our third date, I told him I had complicated family history. On our fifth, I told him a little more. Months later, when I finally told him about Union Station, he didn't interrupt. Didn't overreact. Didn't offer me some lazy line about everything happening for a reason. He just reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "That should never have happened to you." The simplicity of it nearly undid me. We got married in a small ceremony with Mark walking me down the aisle and Laura fixing the back of my dress while trying not to cry. We adopted a rescue dog named Max, a mutt with one torn ear and the cautious soul of something that had also been left behind too early. I blocked every account my biological parents ever tried to use to reach me. I changed my phone number once after a holiday voicemail from an Illinois line left me shaking for an hour. I didn't talk about them unless I had to. I didn't visit Willow Creek. I didn't use my old name. Most days I could go entire weeks without thinking of Jennifer Caldwell at all. That was the life I had built. And then my phone lit up with 29 missed calls. The voicemail wasn't from my mother. It was from Hannah, my younger sister. I hadn't heard her voice since she was a little girl following me through hallways in mismatched socks, too young to understand why the air in our house always felt charged. Her voice sounded older now. Rougher. The way voices do when life has pressed hard on them. She said our mother had late-stage cancer. She said our father had suffered a mild stroke 6 months earlier. She said the stores were gone. Not struggling, gone. Every single one. Closed or sold at a loss. Because the family story my parents had buried in court records had resurfaced. Hard. Publicly. Apparently, my mother, in a stunning act of her own particular brand of stupidity, had left a comment on someone else's Facebook parenting post about how children today needed stronger discipline. That one comment opened a door she could never close again. Old neighbors started talking. A retired court clerk hinted that the rumors were true. Someone found an old newspaper brief about a custody matter tied to a minor abandonment investigation. A former employee chimed in about what they were like behind closed doors. The image they'd spent decades carefully constructing collapsed in public, fast and ugly. Customers stopped coming. Church friends went quiet. Civic groups stopped calling. Willow Creek, which had once protected them with gossip and politeness, turned on them with the same tools. They were living in a subsidized apartment outside town now. No house. No stores. No standing. No version of the old family left to hide inside. And then Hannah said the line that told me exactly why there had been 29 calls instead of one respectful message. They wanted me to come back. Not because they had changed. Not because 20 years had made them brave enough to face the truth. Because they were out of options, out of money, and terrified of dying alone. I asked Hannah why she was calling if she knew I had every reason not to answer. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Because I wanted you to hear it from someone who isn't lying to you." She told me she had cut contact too, recently, after becoming a mother herself and finally requesting copies of the court paperwork to understand what had really happened when I disappeared from the family. Our parents had spent years telling her a softened version. That I'd overreacted. That the state had overreached. That I'd been manipulated by foster parents who wanted a daughter. Hannah said reading those court records felt like being hit by a truck. She looked at her own little boy afterward and realized she could never let people like that near him. Alex told me I owed them nothing. Laura told me whatever I chose, it had to be for my peace, not their comfort. Mark said very quietly that some people only look for the bridge after they've burned the house down. I sat with that all night. By morning, I knew one thing clearly. I was not going back to save them. I was going back to end it in my own voice. I flew into Chicago 2 days later and drove the rest of the way to the hospital. The room smelled like disinfectant and stale fear. My father looked older than I'd imagined. Smaller too, as if illness and disgrace had finally stripped him down to the ordinary man beneath the performance. My mother still had that instinctively arranged face, even lying half sick in a hospital bed. Like dignity was something she could apply like lipstick. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my mother started crying before I'd even sat down. Not a quiet cry. The kind built to pull focus. She said my name. My old one. I corrected her once and only once. Sophia. She nodded, dabbing at her face. My father said they had made mistakes. Mistakes. The coward's word. The word people use when the truth is too ugly to say out loud. I told them no. A mistake is missing an exit on the highway. A mistake is forgetting milk at the store. What they did was deliberate. They drove their 12-year-old daughter to a city she didn't know, left her in the middle of the largest train station in Illinois with $9 and no phone, drove past her slowly enough to watch her panic, and then laughed about the bet while she stood on that sidewalk. Then they spent 20 years lying about it. My father started to speak, probably to explain, to soften, to reframe it one more time. I didn't come all that way to listen to another defense wrapped in cleaner language. I told them they had turned my fear into a game. And the reason they were sitting in this room now, without a business, without their reputation, without either daughter beside them, was because games end. People find out. Children grow up. Truth catches up, even in small towns that think silence can bury anything. My mother asked if I could forgive them. I told her forgiveness is not a debt I owe to people who only come looking when their lives fall apart. Then I said the sentence I had been carrying in some form since I was 12 years old. You bet on whether I could find my way home. I did. I just didn't come back to yours. They both cried. For once, their tears didn't move me. I was not cruel. I didn't yell. I didn't insult them. That was the part that surprised me most. Revenge, when it finally came, didn't feel loud. It felt cold. Clear. Exact. I told them I would not be paying bills, managing care, or restoring contact. I told them Hannah had every right to protect her own child from them. I told them my family was in Colorado, and in Illinois with the people who had actually earned that word. Then I stood up. My father asked if this was really goodbye. I looked at him and said, "It's been goodbye for 20 years. You're just the last ones to understand that." I walked out. 20 minutes. That was all it took. In the parking lot, the air felt thin and bright. I stood there with my hands shaking, not from regret, but from the strange release that comes when something that has haunted you for 2 decades finally has a shape you can leave behind. On the flight home, I thought about the girl at Union Station. The one who had believed being abandoned meant being unwanted forever. She had been wrong. She was unwanted by 2 broken people who mistook cruelty for strength. But she was not unworthy of love. There is a difference between those two things. Learning it saved my life. If there is any lesson in what happened to me, it is this. Abuse does not become discipline just because a parent uses cleaner words for it. Humiliation does not build character. Fear does not make children stronger. It only makes them older before their time. And walking away from people who hurt you, even if they share your blood, is not bitterness. Sometimes it is the healthiest thing you will ever do. I did not leave that hospital feeling guilty. I left feeling educated by my own survival. The family you are born into can shape your wounds. It does not get to define your future. Real love does not laugh when you are scared. Real family does not bet on whether you can survive without them. Real healing begins the moment you stop calling cruelty a lesson and start calling it what it was. And once you do that, you can build a life so honest, so steady, so full of quiet peace, that even the people who broke you cannot take it back.